Good morning, all. It's April 6th, 2022, and welcome to Triggered. I'm Cory Morgan. This is the Western Standard's daily live show. Comes to you at, as with now, 11:30 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. Monday to Friday, we cover news events, get a lot of ranting and raving out of me, some audience interaction, which is great. Good to see you there, Claudia, and or Claudette, I should say. And of course, I always have a number of good guests. So, today, I do have a good lineup to look forward to, actually. I've got a senior Ottawa political columnist, David Krayden. He's been writing some columns for us. He's always very scathing on Prime Minister Trudeau, as are many of us, of course. So I'm sure he's been on before. His views and opinion are always appreciated on here. Colin Craig of Second Org is going to be coming on a little after that. And Colin's been doing advocacy again from a libertarian, conservative point of view. They've written a lot on healthcare reform, and we really need to start having that discussion. So talking with Colin is going to be timely and good on that. And we have rescheduled political scientist Barry Cooper to come back on. There were some technical issues yesterday. Unfortunately, we were to have him then. We do have him for sure today, and we're going to talk about, the preferential treatment of Quebec in Parliament with their seats and just basically in general within Canada. It'll be a very good, Canadian sort of discussion, won't it? So who else we got coming in? We got people all the way from Beverly and Newfoundland, Hockey J in Nova Scotia. It's great to see so many people coming from the East Coast onto this show, actually. We've started out as a Western-based outlet, and Melissa in Halifax. Wow, we got a lot of representation out in the East today. Great to see you guys coming in from the other side of the country there, guys. And plus, of course, all the people around here. The Standard's been doing really well and expanding. Doing well as an alternative media outlet, and we are allowed to speak our minds around here. I'm going to talk, though, and I'm going to start out with what's got me wound up, what's got me triggered, what's got me ranting today, and that is legacy media, the establishment media, the mainstream media, all the things we want to call them. Well, there was a piece that came out the other day from the editorial board of the Globe and Mail, and they truly embarrassed themselves. They really did with their recently published rant against tax cuts for struggling Canadians. So with a complete lack of self-awareness, they referred to the tax cuts being made by Premiers Doug Ford, Jason Kenney, Scott Moe, and John Horgan. See, not even all conservatives. Horgan's no conservative. In response, though, they've been doing these tax cuts in response to skyrocketing energy prices, and the Globe and Mail editorial board called it an opportunity to shower voters with money. Now, let's be clear, cutting taxes isn't showering anybody in money. It's letting them keep their own bloody hard-earned money in their pockets. If anybody's indeed being showered with money, it's Canada's mainstream media outlets, including the Globe and Mail, and they've been slurping at the subsidy trough to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars in taxpayer bailouts over the last couple of years. So it's pretty galling watching a media outlet that's shamelessly taking a bite out of taxpayers in order to bail out their own unsustainable business model, only to listen to them complain that the government's letting those same taxpayers keep a little more of their own earnings. It honestly gave me a vision of a fat pig raising its head from a trough and squealing in rage because it saw a nearby starving laborer nibbling on a couple of crumbs that had been left to him by the farmer. How dare you let that peasant eat those leavings when it could have been given to us? These are subsidy prostitutes of the media, and they've just developed such a sense of entitlement to the earnings of Canadians, they express fury at the very thought of giving taxpayers a break. Any money kept by Canadians, I guess, is a little less money that Canada's rotting legacy media outlets may not be able to take, I guess. I mean, these high costs of energy are harming the entire nation right now. And we're struggling to climb out from an economic hole created through years of pandemic measures. And the high energy prices are only making the struggle that much tougher. If a person doesn't drive a car, high fuel prices are still contributing to the rise of costs for every consumer, whether it's food goods or any consumer goods that are being delivered to your house. Many people are sitting right on the financial edge, and these breaks in fuel taxes are giving them some much-needed breathing space. The editorial board of the Globe and Mail doesn't understand the fiscal struggle, however. Perhaps if the government cut off the constant taxpayer-funded bailouts to newspapers such as the Globe and made them make the same kind of cutbacks that other Canadians had to, they'd begin to get a glimmer of understanding why tax breaks are welcome and needed by Canadians right now. I won't hold my breath on the government cutting subsidies to media outlets anytime soon, however. I mean, editorials such as the one at the Globe demonstrate that the media bailouts are working exactly as the government hoped they would. The Globe editorial parrots the liberal talking points in defending carbon taxes so completely, it reads as if it was written by a communications flack with Trudeau's own party, or even Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault. Who knows, maybe it was. As mainstream media outlets become increasingly dependent on the government to transfer taxpayers' money to them, these outlets are naturally going to find themselves beholden to their government masters. They'll feel less inclination to cover the government with a critical eye. They'll be increasingly tempted to write puff pieces made to make the government officials smile. It's gross crony capitalism at its worst and ugliest. Currently, there's a group of 5 government-appointed members who form a committee that determines who is or isn't an official journalist and what outlet is or isn't a legitimate news source. Their meetings are held in secret, and the requirements for what they consider to be qualified outlets are kind of nebulous. In a recent interview on the Canada Land podcast, the committee chair was repeatedly said of outlets when asked what is or isn't considered journalism, that's journalism, but not the kind of journalism that qualifies for the program. So the standards are arbitrary and fuzzy, and these guys just kind of make it up on the go. More than likely, they'll consider journalism whatever the liberal masters tell them to consider journalism. The Western Standard applied and qualified, actually, as a Trudeau government-approved outlet, by the way. But we refused to apply for or take any of those media subsidies. We just wanted to see if we could do it. If we took subsidies, we'd lose our sense of editorial independence and be on the road to becoming just another trumpet beholden to the government. Principles remain more important to us than government handouts, as they do with many alternative outlets. Of course, that's why the government doesn't like alternative media. That's why it's so important that we don't allow the federal government to continue with its quest to centralize and control media. They would shut down every alternative media outlet in the country if they could. And rest assured, they're trying to find ways to do it. The Trudeau government's dividing media into a preferred class and a subclass. The preferred class is subsidized, celebrated, and gets good government access. The subclass is often decried as being a provider of fake news and is denied access to government press events. And it's under constant attack from legislation such as Bills C-11 and C-18. The state-manufactured media hierarchy has fostered a sense of elitism and entitlement among the members within the legacy media outlets. The insulting piece in the Globe and Mail wasn't written by some lone columnist. That was the official opinion from their editorial board. Their paper, while shamelessly taking subsidies from the pockets of taxpayers, is officially opposed to giving citizens a tax break. So please, keep that in mind as you consider subscribing to or reading material from legacy outlets such as the Globe and Mail. I mean, you can't yet stop the government from showering your tax dollars on the mainstream media, but you can at least stop giving them any more of your own money directly. They won't respect your wallet or your right to keep the money you've earned, so why should you do them any favors in return? Let them slide into full state broadcaster status like the CBC. And while they still cost a fortune, at least people have stopped reading and viewing them as their ratings prove out. That's what's got me going today. All right, let's get on to a real journalist with Dave Naylor, who has been hard at work in the Western Standard newsroom, and see what's going on today. Hey, Dave, how's it going?
Good, Cory. You have to wonder what some of those Globe guys are smoking, eh? I know what they were paying reporters, so I'm sure those ivory tower executives are getting paid a pretty penny, and probably $2 a liter gas isn't going to hurt their pocketbooks a lot.
No, but I mean, you'd think they would still know better than to at least expose themselves as they did in that editorial. I was actually quite flabbergasted when I read that.
Makes you want to shake your head. Anyways, we've got a very important exclusive that we've just put up on the site. We've got a former Edmonton mayoralty candidate who's alleging the Kenny membership drive up in Edmonton did not require payments. This is an allegation from a gentleman called Malik Chukwunda. And he said local Muslims got together back on March 12th and had a big membership drive. And he'd already paid for his membership online, $99 earlier. But he went in and he decided to see if he could just get one for free. So he went up and signed the form, and no, they didn't have to pay $10. And apparently the premier was there at the meeting and urging people just to go and sign on the dotted line. So yet another example of the sort of fiasco and unethical things that appear to be going on behind the scenes at the UCP. A good story from our Chris Coldcorn in Oldcorn, in Saskatchewan. 10 cities have actually popped up in Regina. The cost of living, up more than 4%, but social insurance benefits only went up 1%. And advocates are saying that's just not enough. to help the poor, and they're developing tent cities in Regina. So that's a sad story there. The war of words between Calgary Police Commission and Council and Calgary City Police continued today. Last night, Chief Mark Neufeld put a 2-week hold on the Police Commission's ordering of the removal of thin blue line patches. And Cory, I know you've ranted on this before. Councillor Penner came forward this morning and says the police leadership in Neufeld have failed by not recognizing that some people think the thin blue line badge is racist, and for allowing officers to continue to wear them while the talks go on. We've got a story out of Ottawa on our ambassador Reid Sears, last ambassador to Afghanistan. He fled Kabul as the city was falling ahead of the Taliban, but he left behind more than 1,000 Canadians and an untold number of Afghans who had actually helped the Canadian forces. FMT Canadian Forces transport plane. So MPs are demanding to see the flight logs just to see how full that flight was and how much effort was put into trying to get more people on the flight. Arlinda Slobodian's got a good column up on the Brian Jean, Jason Kenney feud. Jean, you'll remember, was elected with more than 63% as a UCP candidate in Fort McMurray Lac-La-Biche. Well, he's going to be sworn in as an MLA tomorrow. So there's all sorts of questions being asked as to whether Premier Kenney will actually allow him into the caucus. And, certainly he doesn't want to be seeing Brian Jean across the table from him. So those are the big stories we've got up at the moment, Cory, and lots more to come this afternoon.
Great, thanks. Yeah, just the ongoing bizarro world of the UCP these days. I mean, we're going to be tracking and following it in the month and some to come before we finally find out how this review comes along. It's just the politics being played are outstanding, even for viewers who've watched it for a long time.
Yeah, well, voting opens on Saturday. Premier Kenney will give a big address to UCP delegates virtually, and then the balloting can begin, and the results will be announced on May 18th, Cory.
Okay, well, thanks for the updates, Dave, and we'll keep an eye out for more stuff as it breaks.
Yeah, we'll talk to you later on the pipeline.
Right, yes, we'll have a good one today. Thanks, Dave. So yeah, that was our news editor, Dave Naylor. As I started out in my rant, we are independent and we qualified. We qualified as one of those, Trudeau approved media outlets, even though we aren't taking the money. One of the things they said is you have to produce original content. You have to have a number of reporters and that. And part of why we qualified is we have a large and growing number of reporters, as Dave was showing. We've got Chris Oldcorn writing from Regina. We've got Krayden, who I'm going to be talking later to from Ottawa. We got people in Edmonton all over. BC, Reed is out there. We do that because you guys have been subscribing, and that's how things keep rolling for us, guys. And we really appreciate it. It keeps us independent, keeps us so we don't have to write puff pieces for the government like the Globe and Mail does. And we got to make sure to keep those memberships going, though. It's an ongoing thing. That's why I got to keep nagging you to pay the bills, guys. If you haven't taken out a membership already, hey, get on there and do it. It's $10 a month straight out. You'll save money if you actually use the coupon code TRIGGERED. So you'll save another $10 on that right there. If you take out an annual one, it's $99 a year. It's not that much. And people are getting used to that and understanding. That's why alternative media outlets have been growing as well as we have. This is the price that used to cost you to get a home newspaper delivery, or even less. And it's well worth it. I mean, these stories are constantly coming out. We're breaking them. Original sources, as we said. Get out on there, guys. Take out a membership. Buy one for someone else if you like. You can buy it as a gift. We also have corporate memberships. You want to get a bulk buy, you can talk to us, send a communication. We have a number of corporate clients who give access to their employees, so they know their employees have got good access to some direct news. So thank you all who have already subscribed. And hey, if you haven't already, what are you waiting for, guys? Get on board and subscribe. The other thing is our sponsors, of course, and that's important. And one of our main ones is Bitcoin Well. These guys have been a good sponsor for us for quite some time now. If you're looking to get into digital currencies, you want to find out what it's all about, how to get involved. Bitcoin Well, these guys are a Western Canadian company. Like, one of the biggest fears people have when it comes to digital currencies, we don't know about it. That's fine. Guys like me who are going a little gray, it's a new thing. It seems foreign. And hey, we worked hard for our money. We're fearful of scammers and things like that. So we want to be sure that we're putting our money into something safe. Well, Bitcoin Well is a publicly traded company based in Western Canada, gives you personal one-on-one service. They call it white glove service. You're talking to a real person face to face to help you get set up with your Bitcoin account, whether it's small, whether it's large. These guys are the ones to help you safely get involved in digital currencies through Bitcoin. They've got ATMs all over through the West. They'll set you up for automatic bill payments if you want with your Bitcoin account, or automatic deposits into your account. So check them out, bitcoinwell.com. A great sponsor and a great way to get yourself into the world of digital currency. So yeah, a couple of those news stories that was interesting out of Chris Oldcorn, our Saskatchewan reporter there, with tent cities are springing up in Regina. I mean, things like that. And as somebody else was saying, Halifax is full of tent cities now too. And I mean, it's a big and complicated problem. Some of it's due to just financial hard times. Some of it's also due, again, and I'm always on about it, it's been a big issue with me, is the opioid epidemic. And it's an epidemic. We've got addicts in a way that we've never seen before. I mean, they've always existed. It's always been a problem. But nowadays, it's like none seen before. I tweet it quite regularly. It's my normal walk here. I walk past a spot commonly associated, unfortunately, with drug use. And some poor soul with the city has to keep cleaning it up. And still, it just keeps getting filled up with old discarded syringes and things such as that. And today, the picture, there was 3 more syringes laying there. The other thing that was odd, almost striking with that too, though, was they always have a bunch of little alcohol swabs for when they take their injection and everything. It's a weird mindset. You're injecting yourself with poison that who knows, who has sold it to you and who got it to you. And you're throwing your syringes out, with the points out laying all over the ground. So you're not concerned about the safety of others or anything. But they'll take the time to swab so they don't get an infection on their injection site. I just, odd thinking. I don't know, just something I noted as I saw those. But we've got very large problems. As Jade is saying, mental illness and drugs, this is a big and growing issue within Canada. How we're going to deal with it over time, I don't know. But a lot of politicians don't want to deal with it at all if they can help it. And we're seeing that, as we've been reporting on regularly with Calgary City Hall. They're spending their time going on about finding an official bird for Calgary and the patches that police officers wear, and banning vaping in parks. Yeah, they want to ban people from vaping. You can shoot up on a train. That's not a problem. But heaven help you if you are vaping on a park bench somewhere outdoors. They really got to get their priorities straight. Either way, I'm going to move on to somebody who's probably going to talk about federal politicians who don't have their priorities straight. They always give us lots of stuff to rant and go on about, and that's our senior parliamentary columnist, David Krayden, who's been putting out a lot of pieces lately and certainly calling out the Trudeau government on a regular basis. So let's bring him in the studio and have a chat. Hey, David, how's it going?
Good. Nice to be here, Cory.
Well, I appreciate you coming on. And yes, you've had those stories coming out. As I was saying, the government never fails to give you lots of fodder to write on.
Always. This is I hope the last days of the Trudeau government. I always jokingly say that, but it never fails to amaze me how Trudeau is so self-absorbed in his politics. And he has one great commonality with President Joe Biden south of the border. Is incapable of apologizing for things he does himself. He loves to apologize on behalf of Canada for things that Canada has allegedly done in the past or things Canada allegedly does today. But he cannot take personal responsibility for things he does, especially if you noted when he talked about his blackface routines, which he admits he can't even remember how many there were. He blamed his white privilege and he blamed the racism in Montreal. And I suppose his own family for that. Thank you very much, Justin. I'm sure his father rolled over in his grave. But that's exactly the way he is. He blames everybody else for his problems, and he blames everybody else for the way things are. And it's just amazing to me how the effrontery of just questioning Trudeau. He just seems to think he's beyond personal criticism. And although he invites it constantly, and that's what's remarkable about his government. So it's always a joy to have this government in one respect, because it's a columnist's dream. He has so much to write about.
Oh yeah. Well, then it does get annoying and insulting, especially when he does do his regular apologies and always frames it though as let this be a learning lesson for all of us. Hey, no, you don't. Don't speak on my behalf. I didn't need to learn not to wear blackface. I already had that sorted out as a kid growing up in the 70s. You're the one who needed to learn from this, Mr. Trudeau, not us. But he always likes to spread that around. It's everybody's problem, not his.
Yeah, that is it. And like I was saying, it's remarkable to me. There's like 35 years plus age difference between the two of them. But I cover U.S. politics as well. And it's amazing to me how similar these two personalities are, Biden and Trudeau. They are remarkably similar personalities in terms of their personal mannerisms and the fact they both like to point the finger at other people for their own personal foibles and their own personal problems. And neither of them can take responsibility for their own acts. And they love to point the finger at other people. And they both have political enemies lists. And they demonize their opponents. I don't know if Biden is learning from Trudeau or Trudeau is learning from Biden, or they're both edifying each other in their own way. But it's fascinating to see the two of them on the political stage together, despite them coming from radically different backgrounds and being completely different in so many ways. There seems to be a political sharing going on right now between the two of them. It's quite fascinating, just from a surely political science point of view. If you can be that that detached from it, although it's difficult because it's maddening at the same time.
Yeah, well, they were both raised in worlds that we can't imagine. I mean, Biden was a senator since I think before I was born almost, and Trudeau, of course, was part of that family and living in a special world. They haven't gotten to see what the real world's like, and we're seeing that leak out. But also, I mean, the enemies lists and the way that they've weaponized legislation almost. Your most recent column, I mean, on how some civil servants, I mean, there's rules that where they can protest and how politicized they can be. If you were a civil servant and you went out and took part in the truckers' convoy, you would be fired and into a great deal of trouble. But apparently, if you're a civil servant who likes Trudeau, you can take part in protests and there's not a problem with that.
Yes, if you like Trudeau, you like Trudeau's policies. There's not really any political fallout for you or any judicial fallout, because if you happen to be protesting pipelines or you're a member of Black Lives Matter, which is a very violent group and has been violent towards the police and has incited violence towards the police, that's okay. I mean, Trudeau will show up at your protest and bow down and embrace your politics. And by doing so, he's saying, go ahead, participate, and you won't be affected by this. And once again, in those who participated in the counter protest to the Freedom Convoy, Trudeau gave their blessing to that by saying that the Freedom Convoy was made up of a bunch of white supremacists and Nazis. So therefore, if you were protesting against them, that you obviously were anti-white supremacists and Nazis. And that's okay in Canada to be that way. But it's not okay to be part of the Freedom Convoy, because that's a fringe element, and they were dangerous. And the OPP said they were a source of danger to our national security. So this double standard is incredible. I mean, and of course, as somebody who was with the Freedom Convoy day in and day out, reporting on them, I didn't see any violence. I didn't see any national security threats. I didn't see anybody intimidated by these trekkers. I didn't see any of the things that Trudeau imagined, and he did. He went away, and I think as I quipped on a major U.S. network, I think he went away for 6 days, watched all 6 volumes of The Matrix, and came back and imagined that's what was going on Wellington Street. And it was all in his imagination. None of these things actually happened. And much like Joe Biden imagines a lot of things, maybe Trudeau's entering into that state of mental acuity or lack of mental acuity a little early. I don't know. But he certainly was not speaking about reality half the times when it came to that convoy.
Well, there's a scary thought, because Trudeau's the same age as I am, 51. So theoretically, and at the rate he's going, he could stay in there until he's as old as Biden. I don't see any evidence that this guy's going to be unseated anytime soon. So if this is his mental disconnect today, just imagine Trudeau 20 years from now. Man, he's going to be incomprehensible. But hopefully, perhaps we remedy that sooner rather than later. But with this double standard, again, to getting so flagrant, they don't even put a veneer of balance towards things. Like with the civil servant issue, you can make the law saying, look, we're going to allow them all to protest because it's a right, or we do stick to the rule and allow none of them. But they won't do that. They'll flagrantly break their own rules when it favors them.
Yes, and completely silent about it too, because there's been absolutely no comment from the civil service. There's been no comment from the government about this incident and this issue. And God knows how many other civil servants were involved. We only know about this incident because he flagrantly revealed it in a Glebe community newspaper, which is certainly not that well read, but it became public knowledge because of this. And goodness knows there might be other public servants coming forth now and proudly announcing that they too were out there on the front lines opposing these white supremacists and Nazis before it was too late. So we might be seeing more of this, but God knows we won't be seeing the top bureaucrats in Ottawa or the government of Justin Trudeau saying that this is unacceptable, because certainly they were clandestinely anyway following the marching orders of this government, which was to oppose this freedom convoy at any cost. That certainly was the order given by Justin Trudeau every time he stood up in the House of Commons and declared these people to be unacceptable, to be Nazis, to be white supremacists. He made that quite clear.
Yeah, and then another column, just to pivot a bit more then, speaking of Trudeau governments, though, one of his former luminaries from cabinet, Catherine McKenna, now has resurfaced again, and she's back, as you put it, on the environmental gravy train, only she's got an international profile now.
Yeah, that was probably the most popular column of the week. Everybody, certainly our readers, conservative, libertarian, all love to hate, and I say that in a gentle way. They love to dislike Catherine McKenna. She was a terrible minister of the environment and in climate change, as Trudeau tacked on that other descriptor when she became minister. I mean, she was no sooner in the job, and she was at the Paris Climate Change Conference and having, a French photographer racking up a huge $6,600 bill of herself at work and play in Paris. And she, from day one, she had no conception of the taxpayer paying the bill for her job. And she never did. And she was always coming out with ridiculous expressions of how we were, days away or weeks or months or years away from this catastrophic climate change disaster, which was going to happen, and she thought on her watch at times. And she always aggravating. I never actually had the opportunity to meet Catherine McKenna, but I reported on her quite a bit when I was doing U.S. news during the previous 5 years, and she became quite a bit of a joke amongst conservative broadcasters south of the border because she was so fanatical about her environmentalism and about the climate change agenda. And it just seems to me, I mean, I was thinking, of course, about Douglas MacArthur's famous expression. He said, "Old soldiers never die, they just fade away." But I thought, climate change activists today, they just never seem to fade away, even though they become terrible hypocrites. And I'm thinking of like Al Gore. He came up with this film that's already out of date. Where he was predicting that the ice caps were going to melt by now and that New York City would be underwater and that all of these terrible things were going to happen. We're not even close to that. He flies around, on his private jet. All of these climate change hypocrites do this. They live in huge estates that burn up a huge carbon footprint, and yet they keep on getting these climate change and environmental gigs that pay back enormous salaries, and they keep preaching the same message. And David Suzuki in Canada is the same. I mean, guilty of abusing the same law, the same principles he tells us not to breach, and he keeps getting away with it. Huge speaker fees, and he continues to preach this discredited message, and yet people keep on asking for him to do it. And here she is at the UN. Where else would she end up? At the UN, the most hypocritical organization on earth, where you have a UN Human Rights Council that has some of the most abusive governments on the earth on it, guilty of the worst human rights offenses. So Catherine McKenna is in fine company. She's at the UN now. And I don't know how much damage she can do there, because the UN, as I said in my column, is a useless organization that it largely produces recommendations that have no effect in law. So she can't go around banning things, but she can certainly make a lot of money, which is part and parcel of having a UN job. And she can create a lot of publicity for herself, which she loves. She just loves the camera, and she loves those media spots and those interviews. So, Catherine, you're back in the spotlight.
And an expensive annoyance, perhaps. As you said, she probably can't have accomplished too much there. I mean, that is her element where she would belong. As with the picture that it was accompanying your column, and that everybody, again, laughed at, is she loves virtue signaling, standing there on her bicycle showing, look, everybody, you can ride your bike to work like I do, in her photo opportunity with her high heels on. And I don't ride bicycles a lot myself. I do occasionally. Well, I never wear heels, maybe. If I did, I suspect I'd have a really hard time riding a bike with that.
Probably
but I guess
so. Yeah,
the virtue signaling was more important than the reality there. So, what I see you've, I just saw that since I've been here. I see you've posted another story. I haven't had a chance to have a look at it. What's going to be? I'll have that up after the show this afternoon. What are you working on right now?
Well, I just noted that story that the Western Standard put up, based on, I think it's Bill C-18, which is the government essentially overriding the antitrust laws so that media can collect ad revenue from Google and Facebook. And of course, the big winner in this, you guessed it, CBC. Yeah. And so that leads me into another tirade against CBC. I've been railing against CBC for most of my adult life, largely to no effect, because it amazes me how politicians are afraid to admit CBC should not be getting $1.3 billion a year from the taxpayer. And here they are getting more ad revenue. And the irony of the CBC is twofold. First of all, they get public funding more than any other media organization could ever dream of. I mean, 1.3 billion. Think of what most media organizations could do with that kind of money. But not only do they get public funding, they get ad revenue from public and private sources. And now they're going to get social media revenue. So we should immediately take them off taxpayer funding if they're going to get this as well. But does that occur to Pablo Rodriguez, the Minister of Censorship and Heritage? No, it does not occur to him at all to say, okay, time to cut the CBC off. He wants to fatten up this corpulent government corporation some more, because they do such a great job of promoting the Trudeau government's narrative. They do a great job of that. And they do a great job of modeling how to do that for other media in this country. Because if you watch the news now, and it just amazes me, it's all identical. All of the broadcast news in Canada is almost identical. They're all looking like CBC now, because the CBC is the model. It's the government model for all other media in this country. And of course, Pablo Rodriguez wants the CBC to get richer and bigger and fatter, because it does the job so well for the Liberal government. And now it's getting more money. And I always say, if the CBC is such a wonderful news gathering organization, if it's such a world-class media outlet, if it's doing the best journalism possible, why can't it survive on its own, like all of those organizations do in Canada and the US and around the world? How come it can't survive on its own if it's so darn good? But of course, nobody ever asked that question. I asked that question 10 years ago in an academic paper I did about the CBC, and I took it around to various members of parliament, and nobody wanted to answer that question, because they're all afraid of privatizing the CBC. And I don't know why. It should be, as far as I'm concerned, a mandatory motherhood issue in this country, is get the CBC off public funding, force it to compete as a private broadcaster.
Yeah, well, and C-18 puts the screws to the big social media giants there, but I think that's not necessarily a given. They're taking it for granted that Facebook and the others are going to accept this. I think Australia went through a big and similar battle, and I don't think they got away with it down there, or it's still ongoing right now.
Well, that does ring a bell, but Rodriguez seems to think he talked it over with them and everything's fine. Once again, that's typical of this minister's very rosy look on all policies that he tries to implement. So you might be right, but it doesn't detract from the fact that whether they get the added funding or not, it's time to strip the CBC of its public funding, and because it is a complete waste of money. It does not need $1.3 billion to function, and if it does, it's time for it to stop functioning. It needs to participate in the media world like every other corporate organization.
I'm with you there. I don't think they've made anything good since the Beachcombers, and that's going back a ways. So, all right. Well, I really appreciate you coming in to check in with us today, David, and looking forward to more of your columns from Ottawa as they keep coming out. As we can see from the commenters, they're quite appreciative of your addition to the Western Standard as well. So keep on writing, and I'll talk to you again soon.
Great. Thank you, Cory.
All right. Thanks, David. So, yes, that was David Krayden, our senior parliamentary columnist in Ottawa there. And as he said, our federal leaders never fail to give lots and lots to write on. As Cheryl Dawn was saying, she only likes Heartland. Yeah, there's some productions perhaps that my wife Jane's a big fan of Heartland as well. They shoot a whole lot of that actually down by where I live near Pritis there. But, the main thing is there's no reason that a private company couldn't produce that either, and probably more efficiently. And that's what people got to remember. I mean, if the CBC ever gets defunded, it's gone or whatever. The people don't disappear. The writers, the talent. I mean, there is some talent there. There are some principled reporters hiding among them somewhere in there. I mean, they're getting fewer and farther in between. But it wouldn't be a total wash if that organization was gone. A lot of these productions can most certainly be done by talented Canadians in the private market and put out there. We don't need that massive institution of a state broadcaster. I love saying that over and over again. I doubt Ms. Dunn watches this show, but I know it drives her banana on Twitters when I say state broadcaster. But guys, when your organization parrots the liberal line so much like the CBC does, that's a label that works for you guys, whether you like it or not. I'm going to speak again to one of our sponsors, and that is the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. These guys have been a good sponsor for us for quite some time, and of course their name does say what they are about. They're an association for people who enjoy using firearms, collecting firearms, whether it's target shooting or hunting, whatever you want to do with them, as long as you're being safe and legal, as most legal firearm owners are. We should just leave them alone. But our Liberal government can't leave them alone. They won't leave them alone. They're constantly recategorizing your property and then coming to take it away. And they're still on the move with that, assault-style weapons. I mean, I think they banned a couple pellet guns even in their last grab there. And sure, they're going to come and compensate you for it. But when somebody says, you have to sell me your property, I'm sorry, even if you're going to compensate for them, that's theft. You can't do that. And the government's looking to steal your firearms. Well, the Canadian Shooting Sports Association has a number of legal challenges out on your behalf against these government gun grabs. They're standing up for you. We've got to stand up for ourselves if we want to maintain our rights, maintain our property. Nobody else is going to do it for us. That's where groups like this are very important. Get on there, check it out. And there's a lot of other resources besides, political stuff and everything too. Videos on safe firearm use, links to trade shows and gun shows and things like that. But if you own firearms or you're looking to own firearms and you want to make sure you maintain that right, you got to get on there, guys. Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Take out a membership because that's how they can keep defending your right and not letting the government incrementally take away your ability to have and enjoy safely firearms. Their website is cssa-cila.org, or just, of course, Google Canadian Shooting Sports Association and take out a membership with these guys. It's important. If you don't protect those rights, you will lose them. Not might lose them, you will lose them. Okay, let's look through some news before I get to my next guest here in a little bit. This was something that popped up. I think I got this from ABC when I was looking on Twitter this morning. A school in Pennsylvania on Monday, though, actually decided to take control, and they're limiting the amount of snacks that students can bring into class. They've decided students are bringing excessive amounts of unhealthy food into the school, and they were going to set some limits. Anything more than a 4-ounce bag of chips or a beverage up to 20 ounces, anything more than that is going to be thrown out by security. And they're actually saying they're going to search students' bags. Now, this has apparently sparked outrage in the States, as it should, but it's indicative of a much bigger issue. This is showing where busybodies, bureaucrats, control freaks, and politicians, how empowered they start to feel, how they've gotten. This is one of the side effects of the pandemic. I'm not talking about law and COVID, which I think is probably a lot of hypochondriacs for the most part. But either way, I'm talking about the political fallout. People feel now that they're justified in intruding on anybody's privacy or rights as long as it's for the sake of public health. As soon as they feel that they're saving everybody's public health, they don't think twice about infringing on rights. And even kids, students do have rights. I know that it's not healthy for a kid to drink a gallon of Coca-Cola a day or eat giant bags of potato chips, but it's not the role of the school to actually search their bags, their person, and steal, back to that word, but it's true because they will steal the stuff those students brought in and throw it out. Who do they think they are? But we've given them that power. We've allowed them. We've said, take care of me, take care of me. I'm afraid of unhealthy things. If it's a health issue, you guys can have control of that. This is where we're talking about incremental rights getting taken away. This is what we're talking about when we talk about authorities feeling more and more empowered to get more and more under your skin and into your life. That's just one small example in one school, but it speaks volumes. It shows, again, that these school administrators, that these people thought they should be able to get away with this. Another irony is the only thing that exposed it was Facebook postings, and parents, of course, getting outraged with it. And it sounds like the school might back off on that. But again, as we get the government controlling any means of information, and they're talking about regulating Facebook and social media, where is this world getting to? Where is it going? Where they're going to control everything, even what your kids are allowed to eat. Your kids, not theirs, yours. And they might take away your means of communicating your dislike of that. Again, if we ever want to see more evidence and arguments for the reasons for school choice, which is a separate issue, I should bring another guest in on that pretty soon. There's one there. If you want coddling government to actually raise your kids on your behalf and tell you what you can feed them and what to do, you can stick your kids into the government-run schools. But, let's have that voucher so parents who don't want that, who want to actually have their own freedom to choose what their children are going to be exposed to or not, they can take their voucher and go to another school and put it there. Let the free market decide. Yes, those dirty words, free market. But hey, maybe the majority of Canadians will want public schools with all that. I suspect not, though, and that's why they fight school choice as much as possible. I see, just to get into a quick ramble about school choice anyways, is the double standard when it comes to a lot of educators, particularly unions, the ones who are fighting school choice. Because one of the things they hate all the time is standardized testing. Drives them bananas. That's a thing that unions fight all the time. They say you can't standardize test kids because every kid learns differently. They don't move at the same rate. They need different teaching methods. You can't have a standardized curriculum as well and things like that. Of course, most of what the unions hate about is standardized testing, especially when measured over a number of years, could find out the efficacy of certain teachers. They don't want to see that, holy crap, this teacher who's paid on a scale the same as all the others actually kind of sucks versus that one. There's some teachers who are probably worth double what they make. It's a tough job. And it's it takes incredible talent to be able to do it. But there's a lot of teachers who absolutely suck. And we have no way to measure and move them along. So one of the things, as I said, though, is they use their argument is that all these kids need different learning environments, and that's why standardized testing doesn't work. So, fine. I kind of agree with that. But then why don't you support having more charter schools, more alternative schools, more options for all those kids who learn in different ways? Because you suddenly want standardized public schools with all the same unionized teachers for all those students that you just said are all little unique snowflakes who need to be treated and taught differently. But you don't want to give parents the choice to put those kids into different schools where they might flourish better than they did in others. There's a big double standard going on there, guys. Which side of the road are you walking on? But they expose themselves when it goes on to that, when they speak so strongly against standardized testing. So yeah, what do we got? More of that subsidized CBC thing. Mr. Rodriguez. I think we'll move on. If Colin's ready, I see him in the lobby. If you want to give me a nod, we can pull you in and start talking. Great. So I'm going to bring in Colin Craig from secondstreet.org. Colin's been on the show before, and they are always doing a lot of good work on things. And I want to talk a bit about healthcare reform. How's it going, Colin?
Good. Yourself, Cory?
Very good. Very good. I rant and everything. People think, oh, wow, you're so upset and angry. No, it's my normal state. I'm quite happy this way.
I've picked up on that. And I got to apologize. It seems like your other guests have much better backgrounds than I have. I've got this fake plant here to bring a little bit of color, but it's going to be moving soon. Hopefully my next interview, I'll have something more interesting behind me for people to look at.
Quite all right. You didn't need to even express it was fake. It looks very realistic from here. And Jane and I are very accomplished plant killers. There's few live ones survive in our household, I'm afraid, despite our best efforts. So it's all looking good. It's the content of the conversation is more important than the background anyway. So what I wanted to get into, and it kind of couples on to what I was going on about earlier this week a bit. I mean, Alberta has fired the head of AHS. I don't expect you to speak directly into things like that, but what I'm seeing is that people lining up again in fear that we might be reforming the health system, in fear that it's a signal that we're looking to change things. And I've gone on the opposite thing. Well, I'm hoping it is a sign that we're going to change some things and that we should reform some healthcare. And you guys have done a lot of work on pointing out some of the problems with healthcare right now, particularly waiting times.
Yeah, I mean, I think the better question is, who doesn't want to reform healthcare right now? Does anyone think it's acceptable that patients are literally dying in the healthcare system while they're waiting for surgeries? Does anyone think it's ethical that thousands of patients across the country are on waiting lists, living with chronic pain? Some are having suicidal thoughts. They're getting depression. Their lives are being put on hold. I mean, it's appalling, some of the conditions that some patients are having to put up with right now. Who on earth doesn't think that we need health reform? We've been talking about these problems for decades. We, meaning those in the public policy world, Canadians, commentators, and so forth. And we haven't really seen substantial change. So at some point, I think we have to reflect on Einstein's famous quote about doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. We need to be looking at alternatives. And sadly, the same old tired debate comes up again and again. And I saw it this morning on Twitter. There's a doctor basically talking about, what it was like when she worked in the US, and oh my goodness, Canada can't adopt the US system. There's nearly 200 countries on this planet. Can we not look at some alternative aside from the US? One that Canadians would consider? And the answer, of course, is yes. We can be looking at European models, Australia, New Zealand. There are lots of countries that have universal healthcare systems. And obviously, we should be looking at those to see how we could improve our system here in Canada.
Well, that's it. And if we're looking at, you see, the fear mongers and the protectors of the status quo always like to say that it's the universality that's going to be put at risk. And I don't think anybody is proposing getting rid of the universal nature of the system. I think if you polled Canadians, you'd probably find 90% say, no, we want to make sure we have universal coverage for everybody. It's not even on the table, but it's private provision and options we want to look at. But they turn that discussion towards the states, or they say that we're going to suddenly make people have to deal with credit card healthcare. And that's not the case whatsoever.
Yeah, you're 100% right. There are lots of countries that have universal healthcare systems. And this is a big erroneous comment that you hear all the time in Canada. It's this idea that we're the only country on the planet that has universal healthcare where everyone's covered. That's just simply not true. There are lots of countries, like I said, in Europe, Australia, and New Zealand, where everyone's covered. They're not paying a fortune for healthcare. It's affordable. People can get the care they need. They get better results than what we see here in Canada. So why on earth are we not talking about those systems more? And when I say we, I'm referring to our elected officials and actually moving forward in that direction. And it's doable. I mean, we're not going out reinventing the wheel. We can look at, say, the Swedish model, where they have a system like Canada's and they have private options. If you don't want to wait a long period of time in the public system for getting your hip or knee done, you can go to a private clinic. That's pretty common across the world. Canada's the only, if not perhaps, who knows what's going on in North Korea, but we seem to be the only country on the planet that does not allow people to use their own money to pay for healthcare. And as a result, you often see patients getting onto airplanes, going to other jurisdictions, other countries, getting in their cars and so forth. And it doesn't make sense. If you put the patient at the center of the healthcare system and say, this is who we want to help, this is what the system is all about, you do not do it the way that Canada does it.
Oh, and as you said, they're not stopping people from paying for extra care. They're just pushing them to outer jurisdictions to do it. So, I mean, if it's going to happen anyways, we'd be better off to keep the money here in our own system. And the other myth, I think, that comes to that is it's not necessarily rich people who are going for alternative care. It's desperate people. I mean, if you were told that, you needed a hip replacement, you can't work for the, without it, you're in agony, but it's going to take 3 more years. But if you cash your RRSPs and go south of the border, you can get it done in a month. Well, guess what? You're going to cash your RRSPs and go down there and get it done, or fly somewhere else. It's so wasteful and based on the politics of envy, unfortunately, and it's not working. I mean, if they did have the bottle corked, you could claim, well, we've all got equal levels of misery, but we don't, so it's still leaking. So, let's keep those funds here.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we've talked to a lot of middle-income Canadians who have gotten onto airplanes. They've gone to other countries, China, Mexico, the United States, Europe, all over the world. People are traveling to get the healthcare that they need because they don't want to live in pain. In some cases, you've got people who are in their prime working years and they can't afford to sit on the sidelines for a year or two while the government gets its act together to get them the care they need. So they've done the math and they've said, look, it's going to cost me a bunch of money to do this, but I'll end up being able to make more and I'll have my life during that period. So that's happening. It doesn't make any sense right now. The other angle we look at is the environmental impact. How on earth does it make any sense to force Canadians to get onto airplanes and travel to other jurisdictions so that they can get the care they need in a timely manner? It doesn't make any sense from an environmental perspective, economic, and so forth. And so there's a lot of ways you can do this that you protect that universal nature that Canadians like. And one example I always like to talk about, Cory, is the public school system. Across Canada, there are public schools that you can send your child to, and you don't have to pay. There might be some small school fees in that, but it's not like you're getting a $10,000 or $20,000 bill or anything like that. You pay for it through your taxes. You have that public option across the country, but across the country, there are also some private schools that patients or parents can choose. And some do. The majority decide to use the public system. Some choose private. And what that does is the private options, they take some of the pressure off of the public system. And, the two systems function side by side and the sky hasn't fallen. And I think we could see that same approach in healthcare. And it would ultimately give patients more choice, would help patients, and it would take pressure off the public system.
Well, that's it. And I think a lot of Canadians just kind of have to change their mindset. We've been very programmed, as I said in a column the other day, to believe that this system is equitable and the only way to go. And I mean, if we could just rearrange how we think about things, don't think of the person who's paying some money perhaps to get that diagnostic ahead of you. They're not doing it to jump the line. They're putting money into the system to speed your place up in line as well. I mean, certainly, that person's going to get in there a week ahead of you, but it might save you 2 weeks in line because you had a system that allowed that. Why not? Just why not? Get over the little bit of envy and let them do it, because they're going to do it anyways. They'll go to Montana and Great Falls to get that MRI if they have to. So let's just keep it here.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. It's not rocket science. It's like you're waiting in line at a grocery store and there's 10 people ahead of you. And then someone opens up another till and some go into that other line. And that other till is, private instead of the public system. I mean, that's what it's like. You end up taking some of the pressure off of the line that you're waiting. And one point I would note is that just making that one change, it's going to help. I don't think it's going to cure all the problems with our system. One other option that the Montreal Economic Institute and the Fraser Institute in particular for years they've raised is the idea of activity-based funding. And what that means in plain English is that you fund hospitals differently than they're funded right now. Instead of just giving them a big check each year and saying, good luck, we hope you can help a lot of patients, what activity-based funding does is it funds hospitals based on the output that they do. So every time they provide a patient with say a hip operation, well, they get some extra money. So this completely changes the incentive system in hospitals so that they move to a model where they're incentivized to really focus on output, helping patients, getting lots of hips and knee surgeries done, getting lots of procedures done to help patients. And that's just one other thing that could be done that I think could ultimately help the system and patients across the country.
Yeah, well, and we got a lot of work and myth busting to do. Like I see one of the commenters, Wildrose, saying we're going to end up with people dying on hospital steps because they don't have a credit card. But it's ridiculous, it's absurd, it's wrong. But that's a common point of view. We hear that from a lot of Canadians. It's been programmed into them, and that's nobody is talking about taking universality away. I mean, I don't know if we got to stamp that on people's heads or what, but we're not going to do that. But immediately, as soon as you start talking about reform, you'll hear commenters saying these things.
Yeah, and that's the key is go to a country like Sweden. No one's dying because they don't have a credit card to pay for their healthcare. There's lots of other countries in Europe, Australia, New Zealand. Again, they're universal in nature. They end up with better results. That's the key. There are lots of countries that are delivering better healthcare results. They're universal, and ultimately it's helping patients. And we shouldn't be afraid to go down that road, because the road's already been paved. We're not reinventing the wheel. We can look at these countries. How did you guys do it? Great. What did you learn along the way? Okay, we're going to, do it the way you did it and learn from your mistakes. So that is one kind of strange benefit of Canada being so far behind with health reforms, that we can learn from all the mistakes made in other developed nations and copy what they've done best, and ultimately get better services provided to patients. And, to touch on that point I made at the beginning about patients dying, we can't ignore this. We have to talk about this. Patients are dying because they're not getting the care they need in a timely manner. Last year, data that we obtained from Nova Scotia shows that there were 51 patients that died while waiting for procedures which could have potentially saved their lives. So these are things like heart operations, cancer treatment, and so forth. The next important question to ask is, okay, well, how many of those waited for longer than what they should have? Because that's the key. And the data shows that over 3/4 of those patients had waited longer than the recommended maximum wait time. So that's a big, big problem. And, we don't see enough media attention on numbers like that. But behind those stats are everyday people, the mums and dads and grandmas and grandpas that are passing away and not having time to spend with their kids and pursue opportunities and activities that they like. It's tragic. And that's just one example of why we need to be moving forward with health reform, because it's going to save lives. It's going to help patients. It's going to help those that are, maybe their lives aren't going to be saved, but they're going to have a better quality of life because they're not going to be stuck in their apartment for a year or two while they're dealing with chronic pain.
Yeah, well, that's something I've liked what you guys do at Second Street. Just to remind people, check out secondstreet.org to see more on these things. Is you guys do a lot of videos. I mean, personal videos, and you're showing, other individuals, letting them speak for themselves. It's a little more than just more columnists and articles and stats. You've got some great videos talking to people and exposing, this have real impacts on people on those waiting lists, even if you aren't fortunately on one. You're fortunately not on one. I do have a good question, though, from Kim Holmes. It's a valid concern, saying, is it possible, Kim Holmes, I think, said that, is it possible that one reason the individuals are reversed to private care is it's felt that some doctors would leave clinics and other professionals and move to the private ones, leaving a substandard, sort of provision in the public system. And that is a kind of a fair concern. I mean, people don't want some sort of two-tier thing where, the public system is some grimy old beat up hospital with sub-rate doctors and the private one is far superior. How do you avoid that outcome?
Yeah, and that's a very good point. I'm glad she raised that because I think it is a valid one. And I think there's a few things to consider. One is that other countries do this, so it can be done. You can have the public system fully staffed with quality staff operating alongside a private system or private options that also have quality staff. So we know it can be done. How do we get from where we are to that point? And I think in the short term, there might be the incentive for some doctors to maybe want to leave or whatever. In the short term, I think there is maybe an opportunity for governments to place some restrictions around, how many hours a doctor could work in, the private system or something like that. Or maybe the private clinics cannot poach from the public system, something like that in the short term. But over the long term, we need to remember whose responsibility it is for training staff, making sure that there's doctors and nurses that are trained and available for the healthcare system to meet the needs of society. And that, of course, is the government. So if we're not churning out enough doctors and enough nurses, well, then maybe we need to start churning out more of those and dedicate some of the funds in the post-secondary system away from some degrees in that people end up getting, which the marketplace, the society really doesn't need, take those dollars and put them in so that there's more funding for training doctors and nurses. So I think that's another thing that we could be looking at doing to make sure that there are enough staff. But I think she's raising a good point. And the way I look at it is we put a man on the moon. We can find a way to make sure that we address a concern like that and ultimately get better care provided moving forward for patients.
And yeah, we shouldn't assume a completely deregulated system. As we said, there are a lot of models we can look at. I could be wrong. I believe it's the French system, where they have private hospitals, and the way they're regulated is there's a certain percentage they absolutely have to do in the public system first, and then they have a percentage of use that they could put towards private out of pocket. And it kind of works well because the public still accesses those high-end specialists and doctors and facilities. But plus the hospital can draw these, that's part of it, is drawing these specialists. When you're in a rigid public system, you might not have the dollars to compete with other countries to get some of these doctors or nurses and a lot of specialists in. This way, again, they can be subsidized to keep them in that hospital and still do public procedures. I could be wrong in which country that was. I'm thinking that's the one. But I say there's a lot of ways we could look at it to address some of these valid concerns by people.
No, for sure. And I think the UK does something similar where you have to work a certain number in the public system before you can do private, something like that. I mean, like I say, in the short term, I think you could look at options like that. I actually think that having private options alongside the public system would help retain staff, because we know what happens in Canada after doctors and nurses graduate. A good number of them decide to pack their bags and they go to other countries, and the United States being one of those countries, because they can earn more. So if we had these options for them to supplement their income here in Canada, some would choose it. And there was a story in the Calgary Herald a few years ago about a surgeon from here in Calgary, where he would regularly get onto an airplane with his patients. They'd fly down to the Caribbean, and that's where he would do the surgery, and he'd get paid for it. So I imagine he'd do a few surgeries down there, then get back on an airplane and fly back to Canada. It just really doesn't make any sense at all for that to happen. But if you had those options in the private system for him to do that, as well as other surgeons, some I think would take advantage of it. Maybe they work most of their time in this public system, and then on the weekends, maybe they do the odd surgery here and there to earn a few more dollars. And combine that might be enough to keep them in Canada rather than going to other countries where they could earn more.
Yeah, I mean, we just need to start thinking outside that box. Maybe I'll pivot a little more while I've still got you on something more recent you guys put out. I didn't, not giving you a warning on this one, but I'm pretty sure you're familiar with it. You guys published a poll on Canadians' preference for oil exports when it came to domestic supply versus what we'd be sending out to offset Russian supplies and things such as that. What did you guys find there?
Yeah, so after Ukraine was invaded by Russia, we decided to poll Canadians on the idea of Canada increasing production of oil and gas and exporting it so that the world could reduce how much it's buying from Putin's Russia and buy more from Canada. And 78% of Canadians agreed with that idea. I think people are more and more every day, they're understanding how Putin is paying for his invasion. He sells oil and gas to the West, and then he takes those dollars and he buys tanks and rockets, and then he's invaded Ukraine with it. So I think people are understanding that connection, that if we're going to sort of pull out the power cord that is keeping Putin's war machine going, one way to do it is to stop buying oil and gas from him. And like I say, 78% of Canadians support the idea of us producing and exporting more. And it's important to note that there's a large majority like that right across the country, all age groups, men and women. It's something that Canadians, I think, really support. And another option that we polled Canadians on was, okay, well, what if we produce more oil and gas, but we took the government's corporate tax revenue and royalty revenue from these new projects and used it to reduce emissions? And, we thought, well, maybe this is one way that some elected officials might be more warm to this idea, because they're trying to figure out this green component. Whether people like it or not, a guy like Justin Trudeau is very much focused on climate change. So we thought, well, maybe this is an alternative that might help out, is to make this a concession that, okay, well, you take the money from these new projects and use it to fund emissions reduction activities. And that actually pulled a little bit lower than the first one. It was about 68% of Canadians agreed with that idea. But nonetheless, I think those are two policy options that make sense. You know, if we're trying to figure out how we can pull the plug on Putin's war machine, a big answer, or a big part of that answer, is Canada's natural resources. And then at the same time, it I think recognizes the fact that if we keep our resources in the ground, some other country is just going to produce more. So we're not really helping the environment. All we're doing as a country is missing out on economic activity. So those are a couple of the questions that we put to Canadians to see where they stand.
Well, great. Well, hopefully, as Canadians start to come on side with a little more common sense in the energy file, maybe our federal leadership will start to follow suit down the road. They haven't shown much indication yet, but the first step, I guess, in convincing them is that the citizens themselves want to go this route. So I appreciate that poll, and I appreciate you coming on today. Where can people find more information on Second Street and what you're up to, and more on health reform and the rest of the things you guys have been working on?
Yeah, so if people go to our website, which is secondstreet.org, all spelled out, they can find out all kinds of information on what we're doing. We're on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. You can find contact details there too, and see what we're doing. And if people have an interesting story, they can always shoot us an email, and we'll consider it. Because like you said, we don't just do the macro research. We try and find the personal stories that help put a face to the numbers so that people can understand the impacts of government policies.
Well, that's it. I mean, we want to make things relatable. There's political weenies like us who love reading and digging down into those sorts of things, but your average person likes to hear from impacted people directly rather than just the numbers and stats. So I appreciate that with what you guys do.
Well, thanks a lot for having me on, Cory. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks, Colin. Hope we can talk again soon.
Sounds good.
So that was Colin Craig with secondstreet.org. And yeah, they do a lot of work on a number of issues. The most recent one was on the energy and the poll that they had done on where Canadians are on that. And as I talked with Colin predominantly on this time was on healthcare reform, and these waiting lists that are really making a lot of people suffer, and the status quo that we've just got to start chipping away at. We got to understand that we need some reform. This problem is getting worse and worse. It's not like we're spending less money. We're constantly increasing spending on healthcare from every jurisdiction, yet the outcomes they're not getting any better. I mean, we know there's some fantastic doctors and professionals and technologists in the system, but the system itself is just not serving us as well as it should. So I'm good, happy to see organizations opening up those discussions. So I'll be getting on to my next guest pretty quickly here, and that is political scientist Barry Cooper. People might know that name. He's been very prolific in Alberta politics for a long time. He's from the Calgary School, where those of us, again, a little more gray on the sides can remember in the 90s when we used to have quite a few good conservative political scientists out there, and they're still around. They're still working on things. We just don't see quite that dominance of them or working together. And he wrote a great piece in C2C Journal about, as we saw recently with the House of Commons, the seat distribution, and basically how rep by pop isn't quite what is going on in Canada with Parliament, particularly when it comes to Quebec, but also some of the background and why it got there, and why our regional balance is really actually quite imbalanced. So let's bring Professor Cooper in and see what we can talk about there. Hello, Mr. Cooper. Good to see you today.
Good to see you too, Cory.
Thanks. Well, I appreciate you coming on. As I said with that piece you wrote, a lot of people, I think, if they weren't heavy political watchers, were still even confused about that. Like, how can our House of Commons override something as basic as representation by population with parliamentary seats? It turns out it's quite a complicated issue and formula. And I mean, everywhere from the Maritimes into Quebec, we never really have had any real pure rep by pop in there, have we?
No, interestingly enough, rep by pop has been, which is basically one person, one vote, has been contentious from before Confederation, when Laurentian Canada was a colony by itself, distinct from the Maritimes, certainly distinct from Rupert's Land in the Northwest, which then became Western Canada. And historically, when one of those colonies had the larger population, they were very much in favor of representation by population. But then when things flipped, it flipped with Lower Canada or Canada East having a lower population than Canada West or Ontario. Then suddenly they were very interested in basically sectional representation on a basis of equality, so that the two constituent colonies had the same number of representatives in the common legislature. So right from the beginning, it's been basically how do you advance your local interests. If you've got the big population, that's really important. If you don't, it's just your sectional representation that matters. And it's still simply a matter of interest to Laurentian Canada. It has never applied to Western Canada. The last time that anyone even talked about it was during the discussions over a Senate, an effective, equal, and elected Senate. But we know how well that turned out.
Yeah, I mean, Triple E was a big rallying cry for all of us in the late 80s and into the 90s, but it seems to have kind of fallen by the wayside. I think people have kind of given up any idea on, being able to reform it. It's a brick wall to try and change, well, that Laurentian interest, I guess, within central Canada. But I mean, is there any chance of any kind of reform? I mean, I see you referenced another political scientist, Emmett McFarlane. He makes some interesting comments quite often, actually. But he was talking about, Quebec with a different way where we could expand seats and then make sure Quebec doesn't have to face the indignity of having a seat taken away. This province that we coddle within Canada, it gets a little frustrating eventually. Like it's an indignity to have your population represented.
Yeah, well, we all know how special Quebec is because they keep telling us this all the time. It's completely, so far as I can see anyway, it's just completely Quebec politicians, both in the House of Commons and in Quebec City, trying to advance their own agenda, their own importance, their own power. And since we have a rather supine Liberal government that is happy to agree with just about any kind of crazy ideas that come out of Quebec, they're in favor of it. It's, so far as I can see, it's just another move by not just Quebec, but Laurentian Canada generally, to assert their primacy over the rest of the country.
Yeah, well, is there any way we'll ever be able to address that or push back against it? Like with our federal, and you mentioned some of those Conservative Party of Canada leadership candidates, they either abstained from the vote for the most part or voted in favor of preserving that seat for Quebec when that came up in there. I actually had Jean Charest on the show a couple of weeks ago. I asked about that, and he said, well, the solution perhaps is to just, add more seats so everybody gets more and then Quebec never has to lose any. But I mean, I just see you kicking the can down the road and compounding the problem. We don't need more politicians. We just need better ones.
Yeah. I've heard a number of people say that would make Quebec happy if the whole House of Commons was just bigger. The problem is that they also talk about the proportionate power. So they don't just want more. They want to keep the more than they deserve by normal rep by pop divisions. I mean, they would, if Canada were divided up just by the number of seats that each of the province deserved by province, or at least by population, Quebec would lose, I think, about 4 or 5 seats, not one. It's in many respects, I think it's simply an assertion of power because they can do it, and so they will. And until people say, well, no, we don't think that that's right, and do something serious. You might say the foreign policy of Alberta with respect to Laurentian Canada would be involved. But the day that we have a premier in this province who's willing to treat Laurentian Canada as an antagonistic part of the country to us, I don't see that in the near future. Put it that way.
No, again, there's that fear, as I was pointing out with the federal leadership, and members of parliament, but likewise with premiers, they just don't want to take on that battle. But I mean, the numbers are stark, and I think with people with any general sense of fairness would understand it. You had that in your article. I mean, Alberta is going to have one MP for every 120,000 Albertans versus Quebec having one for every 110,000 Quebecers. And then that doesn't even address all the other imbalances we have politically when it comes to La Belle Province.
Yeah, it would take a certain amount of courage for the premier of this province to stand up, I would say for Albertans, but to stand up against Quebecers in particular. I mean, they have not done us any favors in sort of living memory. Just yesterday, the leader of the Bloc in the House basically wanted to shut down the province. I mean, they're not our friends. This is what is hard for I think Alberta politicians to understand. Most Albertans can figure it out without too much trouble, but you get this what Preston Manning used to call being autowashed, and they don't want to do anything. It's and so I think that's one of the reasons. It may not be the only one, but that's certainly one of the reasons why none of the aspirants, including the current incumbent for the premiership of this province, are not held in the highest regard.
No, I mean, if there's been any area, as you said, your average Albertans certainly know that there's an imbalance and mistreatment. I mean, how long, again, it used to be perhaps Quebec was always just looking out for themselves. Well, that's fair enough as a province, but now they're shooting outward. As you said, they're almost, telling Alberta to shut down their resources. So why? What's your problem with us? But the disappointment with Premier Kenney, unfortunately, a lot of it was, well, the Fair Deal panel. A lot of us got on board, said, well, this is a move towards something similar to the Alberta agenda and maybe moving forward and pushing back and standing up for ourselves a bit. But all of those elements of that Fair Deal panel seem to have fallen by the wayside. It never was, they haven't pushed for a provincial pension plan or provincial police force or a lot of the things that Albertans said they wanted. So if we're not going to stand up for ourselves, when are we going to?
Yeah, as I said, I think that's one of the reasons why Premier Kenney is not as popular as he thinks he should be, is because he hasn't done what he said he was going to do on behalf of Albertans and in defending Alberta's interests against these, I would say, predatory politicians in Laurentian Canada. They're not our friends.
No, and another part of the issue, though, I mean, we've got such a complicated formula. Well, that's what we do, I guess, when it comes to legislation. But the maritime provinces don't have a lot of interest, or some of them, in changing this as well. Like one of the reasons PEI has the seats they do is that they couldn't. There's a legislation, part of the legislation saying they could never have fewer in Parliament than they do in Senate, and they have already a number of people in the Senate. So, I mean, the West kind of stands alone in wanting to change anything right now.
Yeah, this is it's interesting. The relationship between the West and the rest of the country has been a kind of I would say nowadays I'd call it a kind of legacy of British imperial ways of ruling what was now or what is now Western Canada from basically from London. An attitude that was then taken over by the politicians in Ottawa, and they've used it quite well to their advantage. They initially actually used this attitude with respect to the Maritimes, and basically managed to buy them off one way or another to bring them into the country. But I mean, this has been known like for over a generation. I remember reading about this stuff when I was an undergraduate. People have not made the same kind of analysis about how Laurentian Canada has adopted these imperial attitudes towards the West. But if eventually we'll figure it out, and maybe it'll even be taught in high schools. Who knows? But eventually, these let's call them structural imbalances result in policy changes. If the Laurentians are not interested in policy changes, well, we can make our changes all by ourselves.
Well, and there's some we can do, but I was wondering what can be done to address some of these without, say, reopening the Constitution. What sort of policy remedies do we have aside from changing the actual structure?
When the governor of Michigan shut down that pipeline that goes between Michigan and or wanted to shut it down, in Ontario. The governor of Alberta could have had an amicus brief on her side, saying, that's a great idea. And that would send a signal to the Laurentians that we've had enough. We're even willing to cut off our exports to you to get your attention. Of course, that, how un-Canadian would that be? But eventually, we'll figure it out. Something like that will take place.
But back to that, letting the Easterners freezing in the dark sort of concept we'd proposed some years ago. And I guess, most of what you're getting at is we've got to find our backbone, though, and start pushing back. In whatever means we have. And we haven't started doing that yet, even.
You wonder how much more it'll take before somebody says enough.
Yeah, well, and of course we are seeing. It's a slow growth, but secessionism, I believe to a degree, is definitely on the rise in the West. People frustrated, throwing up their hands, but it rarely comes to such a number that it's going to start garnering seats yet. Do you think that could eventually come, though?
Well, that's a very interesting observation and a really interesting problem, because independence requires a political leader in this province and next door in Saskatchewan as well, who is willing to be sufficiently, as we would say, unpatriotic to raise the issue. We've got lots of reasons for it, and you're mentioning what happened to Jason Kenney's panel with respect to the police and this sort of thing. Proves that in spades. All it needs is political will. But that's what's missing, and heaven knows when it will show up. I guess when the Laurentians, proceed to shut down the oil sands, maybe that's what'll take it. It'll take something like that to motivate some political leader to say, no, you're not going to do that. We have our interests, and we're going to defend them.
Yeah, we haven't had a René Lévesque surface yet, but it's not to say there isn't one waiting in the woodworks for the next big episode. And we know there's going to be another one. It just seems to be one assault after another to come forth and maybe rally people around. Well, just using that final option left to us.
Yeah, no, I agree, and it's the other thing that I think a lot of people have in this province anyway have seen through is that it's not really about environmentalism. That is simply the excuse that Laurentians use to beat up on Alberta and Saskatchewan. That when you have some of the people in the Trudeau cabinet, I'm sure are fanatical environmentalists, particularly the Minister of the Environment. But that's not really the issue. It's the incredible distaste that Laurentians have, particularly from Quebec, with respect to this province. They do not like us, and there's no reason why we should want to be friends with them.
No, you can only be snubbed so many times before you have to start changing your approach. Well, I really appreciate you coming to speak to us today and that article on it, and just showing it really breaks down. As I said, it's on the CTC Journal. It's called Quelle Surprise. Quebec wants more seats in the House of Commons, that is. And, just showing breaking down the entire system is quite stacked against us. And as you said, quite hostile. And perhaps we're coming to an impasse. Where can we find more information on your work? Where else do you publish these days?
Well, Marco Navarro and I have got a book, second edition of a book on COVID that should be out within another couple of months. It's called the COVID-19, a story of a pandemic moral panic, and it's the first edition came out in about 14 months ago, and a lot's happened since November of 2020. So it's bringing stuff up to date, and a lot of people find it suitably offensive, so that's fine.
Well, great. And we've had Marco on the show before, actually. He writes the odd column for us over here. Perhaps once that second edition comes out, we can get you guys on and discuss more of that in the future.
That'd be terrific. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much for coming on to talk to us today, Mr. Cooper, and keep well. I hope we can talk again soon.
Thanks, Cory.
Okay, thanks. Yes, that was Barry Cooper from the University of Calgary, and still writing great stuff and saying it like it is. It's as we're saying, that reticence on the part of legislators. We see it in the media and so on. That of angering or upsetting Quebec. I mean, as he's pointing out, Quebec isn't just indifferent to us anymore. They're getting outright hostile with us. They're actually trying to shut us down, and not just Quebec. Mr. Cooper mentioned the Laurentians quite often, and that's a term that's used more and more. We're hearing now, and it's a good one because it points out it's the Laurentian elites. It's the old families, the old money, the old media. It's the old guard in central Canada. And of course, it references, basically anybody within a few miles of the St. Lawrence River Valley. These are the people who control this nation. They're the people who've always controlled this nation. And they have a sense of entitlement. They feel, as I believe the word was used, imperialistic. We are the outlying colonies rather than a province to be respected and to have a degree of independence of its own. And as I also brought up, with the Maritimes, because they're out there too. And they haven't necessarily gotten a good deal from the Federation as well. And, we got to start looking again. This status quo, we swirl the drain. It's that question when it comes to healthcare, schools, any of these things, we keep coming to the same wall. How bad does it have to get before Canadians are ready to change things? And I don't know yet. We don't seem to have gotten there yet. But at some point we have to, I would think. I'm going to speak one more time to one of our sponsors, by the way, and that's Bitcoin Well. I talked to him about him again. Just that reminder, speaking of the Laurentians, speaking of elite, speaking of Central Canada, well, our bankers are a lot of those as well, our Canadian small number of federally regulated banks. And we saw recently that with the government's permission or government's orders, they can come in and snatch your money from you on a whim. There's a lot of incentive these days to get away from conventional currency, store some money, save some money somewhere else, somewhere out of that reach, somewhere that might not be as stuck with the ups and downs of the Canadian currency. Well, Bitcoin is one of those options for you. And Bitcoin Well are one of the guys to show you if it's for you, or not. I mean, their goal is to educate you on it. And they have some great stuff. They call it, what do they call it? Bitcoin Academy, I believe it is. And it's online. They've got seminars, webinars, videos to show you what it's about. Take the confusion out of it. Make sure that you're safe and comfortable investing in it if you choose to. And again, maybe it's not for you and you don't. But this is the way you can find out if that's the currency for you. And they have corporate plans. I like mentioning it because I think it's kind of cool and neat. We do that here at the Standard. Every month, a portion of my salary goes into my Bitcoin account, and the Western Standard matches that and puts it in. So I get a little savings in Bitcoin off to the side there. It's voluntary, of course. I mean, none of the employees here at the Standard have to take part in that. And other companies can do the same sort of thing. Check them out. It's a good incentive for your employees, for some side savings for themselves. And, if your employer, maybe if you're an employee, ask your employer if they want to go into something like that. Check them out. Bitcoin Well. They will teach you all things safe about Bitcoin. This is interesting from James Dickey. I've been watching this, or Jamie Dickey, I should say. It says from the CBC, the Bay du Nord project will be approved. This was something I talked to Crystal Whitvrongel from the Montreal Economic Institute about the other week. And it's a big offshore oil project off the coast of Newfoundland that has been in the air for some time. The government's been dragging their feet, kicking it around, the usual crap. I believe their deadline was the 15th of this month. Perhaps they're announcing early that they're actually going to do it. I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things when it comes to our federal government too. I'll believe it when I see it, but apparently it sounds, according to Mr. Dickey, that it's going to be approved. That's a good development. It is, and it's going to bring a lot of funding into Newfoundland and the Maritimes that they desperately need as well. We're all having hard times. Of course, they'll have to fight and keep the federal government from snatching it all out from under their feet as well. As Nico's putting in the comments to remind everybody, if you're following us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, we're streaming now. Rumble, of course. I like Rumble because they don't cancel. Make sure to like, follow, share, all of those things. Hit the alert button when the specials come up so you can see them and know that we're doing these shows, because we do things out of the blue. This is scheduled every day and it's regular, but we do other specials. We're going to be recording The Pipeline this afternoon, and that's where Dave Naylor and Derek Fildebrand and I all kind of round up the week's issues and discuss those. And we got a good one coming up today, and that'll come out tonight. And of course, tomorrow I'm going to be back, and it's going to be with guests Shuvaloy Majumder from the Montreal or from the Macdonald Laurier Institute. So many institutes out there. But Shuv is a really bright guy. I've known him for quite some time. We're going to talk on some international issues and things he's written on where Canada should land with the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And then another candidate for the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada, his name is Grant Abraham. That list is just getting bigger and longer, but the more we talk to, we'll see how that race develops. So we'll be talking to those two tomorrow. And of course, I'll have some sort of rant on the go too. We'll see what has me worked up at about 6 o'clock tomorrow morning when I start thinking of what I'm going to write. Thank you all for tuning in today, guys. I'll see you tomorrow at 11:30.